little bit behind schedule, so I'd ask for your full cooperation on every side in relation to the time limits. So moving on to leaders' questions under Standing Order 36.
Taoiseach, yesterday I raised with you the real and very serious concerns held by many regarding the ownership of the new National Maternity Hospital, but you dismissed these concerns once again and you doubled down on your characterisation of them as a red herring. However, last night, in a letter to the Oireachtas Health Committee, two HSE board members, Professor Deirdre Madden and Dr. Sarah McLaughlin, restated their strong opposition to the ownership deal. And in the letter, they described the ownership deal as unsatisfactory. And here's some of what they had to say, Taoiseach. They say that while the shares have been transferred from the Sisters of Charity to a new company, St Vincent's Holdings CLG, we believe that in the interest of public trust and confidence in this new project, there should be absolute clarity on the separation of church and state. They go on to observe that the necessary public trust and confidence would be better achieved if the state owned the land on which the hospital will be built. Now that comes from two eminently qualified professionals who were centrally involved in planning for the new maternity hospital. Their concerns, it has to be said, mirror those held by many of us on the opposition benches, indeed by many deputies on the government benches, and by people right across society. I want to put it to you, Taoiseach, that the very best way to allay fears and to resolve this problem is for government to secure full public ownership of the land. That we have a clear transaction in which the St Vincent's Healthcare Group transfers the land directly to the state. That, after all, was the initial promise or undertaking from the Sisters of Charity. And this would provide absolute airtight clarity. It would ensure the best protection of the state's interests in what will be a very, very expensive project. And it will ensure beyond doubt that it is the state's health authorities who set the range and the clinical governance for services provided at the hospital. I think this is just a matter of common sense, but you have pushed back against this common sense in claiming that the current labyrinthine arrangements amount to public ownership, but they don't, Taoiseach. And repeating the refrain of a tenner a year doesn't change that reality. There is no doubt in my mind that the St Vincent's Healthcare Group has to move. They have to step up to find a resolution of this issue, but it is also true to say that government must step up, because through inaction you will be acquiescing and colluding in a deal and arrangement that does not fully protect the public interest. Tá bunús mai leis na himní maidir leis an ospidéal Mórthachas nua, le rion na sean ceistena tromcúiseach a léirí an Tullav Madden agus an Dr. McLaughlin go bhfuil na himní céine ag daoine ar fud an tír. Is sé an bailachas fear chun an fáibse a réiteach nó go naim seoí an rialtas únéireacht stót ar an talamh. We want to see this hospital built quickly. It can, it must represent a huge step forward for the modern progressive healthcare that women in Ireland deserve. So I want to put the proposition to you again, Taoiseach, in the hope, perhaps more than the expectation, that I will get a clear answer. Will you, along with the Taoiseach and the Minister for Health, get around the table with the St Vincent's Healthcare Group and tell them, convince them to transfer that land directly to the state?
Dús bar caiigh mé rá go bhfuil na gealúntaí dleathach ann ionas go mbeidh gach seirifisí atá dleathach sa tír seo faoi láthair agus sa todhchaí go mbeidh siad ar fáil san ospidéal nua. Ní léon áras faoi sin agus tá an córa dleathach feite ag an héin agus don rialtas go rééis sin an scéal. Agus is trosfada go dtí an lá seo ach caiigh mé is sin a rá. What I want to say, Deputy, at the outset is this, that the 300-year lease at €10 a year is effective ownership. And I've received legal advice to that effect. okay? It is ownership. You may disagree. That is your entitlement to disagree. And I have read the letter from Professor David Madden and Dr. Sarah McLaughlin, and they do make the point that at the time of the HSE Board's decision on the 14th of March, the transfer of shares in SVHD from the Religious Sisters of Charity had not occurred, and we held concerns regarding realisation of that transfer, I quote. And while the shares have since been transferred, they do make the point from RSC to a new company, St Vincent's Holdings CLG. We believe that in the interest of public trust and confidence in this new project, there should be absolute clarity on the separation of church and state. Now, there is absolute clarity on the separation of church and state, and that's contained in the constitution of the new hospital, which has reserved powers, which makes it very clear that there can be no religious ethos or any ethnic or any other consideration in the deliberations of the hospital. And also then, so that's very clear in the Constitution, the reserved powers. And the Minister's Golden Share gives the Minister the power to enforce and oblige the directors to follow through on those and implement those reserved powers. And then the operating licence from the HSE to the new hospital board also puts that obligation in place. And what I don't get from no one's to date, and I've asked this last week as well, how does the differentiation between a 300-year lease at €10, and I have the conditions here, so let's not pretend it's 850. It's not. Because if you read any of the conditions on the lease, they're normal conditions that everybody would be applying to. So the tenant with prime responsibility for the funding of public hospitals remains a tenant under the lease. That's not an imposition. There's no change to the permitted use without consent. That's not an imposition. It's going to be built as a. I'm not talking to you, but it's going to be built as a hospital. I've read it all. There are no impositions in this. It's basically saying go and build a maternity hospital. Let's for the sake of clarity accept that, and let's not try and cloud in terms of the conditions of this. Because none of these are an imposition on the maternity hospital. And in fact, it is a co-location. But the question I want to put to you, Deputy, is no one has explained to me how the difference between a 300-year lease at €10 and outright hold of freehold ownership, how that materially affects the governance or the clinical, operational or financial independence of the hospital. Nobody has actually explained that to me, the how of that. People might not be happy, they might want freehold versus leasehold, but there's no clear indication following the articulation of that view as to how that materially impacts, in real terms now, the operational, clinical or financial independence of the new maternity hospital. And I would say to you that, yesterday I quoted from the Director of Midwifery Services and Assistant Directors yesterday. The Minister has also received correspondence from a very significant number of midwives, all the directors of midwifery, across all of Ireland's maternity hospitals. They're unanimous in their support for the move of the National Maternity Hospital from its current inner-city location to a new purpose-built, world-class facility at the campus of St Vincent's
Deputy
Hospital.
Mary Lou McDonald.
Taoiseach, because for a very long time, midwives, clinicians, all concerned, and women, of course, have been very much in favour of the new maternity hospital and indeed proper investment in maternity services. So that shouldn't surprise any of us. You see, you said that there's an unanswered question, but let me put this to you. €10 a year for 299, 300 years, you say, is effective public ownership. But the question is this: that being the case, why is it that there hasn't simply been a clean transaction and a transfer of this land to the state? That's actually the question. If you're saying that it is public ownership in all but name, why is it not full public ownership? That's the first question. And the second question is this, Taoiseach. Given that you have a hand to play, I mean, the state is the key anchor of the voluntary hospitals, including St Vincent's. The substantial state money goes in there. You have a very powerful hand to play as government. Why is it? Why is it that you are resisting my very reasonable request that you, the Taoiseach and the Minister for Health, lead from the front and resolve this issue and make public ownership in all but name actual, legally certain public ownership of this land? That's actually the question, Taoiseach.
I have led from the front on this. And I've asked the Minister of Health over the last year to get this issue resolved once and for all, because it's been going on since 2013. Previous Minister, Minister Harris, brought in Kieran Mulvey, for example, to bring all the parties together. So let's not pretend there hasn't been detailed, exhaustive engagement between all parties to this over the last 9 years. 9 years. Okay? So we have laid on this, and I'm determined that we get something done. Get the hospital built for the benefit of women and newborns. And in relation to your question, there is an argument, by the way, in terms of the integration of a massive tertiary hospital that's currently on the site. This is going to be a campus, including the existing tertiary hospital and the maternity hospital and a new one in India. It needs to work. I can understand where the St. Vincent's Health Group was coming on that. Why? I mightn't agree with it, but I can understand. I don't see a big mystery. I don't see a big conspiracy there. Genuinely, I don't. But some are. But then what's the issue then? If you're not arguing a conspiracy, we do have to at some stage take people at good faith in relation to this. At some stage we do.
Thank you.
Otherwise we'll never get movement on.